Welcome to the Community Health Worker Hybrid Certification course. This video discusses learning objectives and lesson planning developed around the State of Texas directives as far as competencies for this topic area. As governed by the State of Texas, the learner-centered competencies we will address are ability to share information one-on-one, ability to master information, plan and lead classes, and collect and use information from community people. By the end of this training module, the community health worker will be able to develop lesson plans based on the demographics of the target community, demonstrate delivery of individual and group lesson plans, identify methods, tools, and techniques for assessing concept comprehension and mastery. So what is a learning objective? A learning objective is an explicit statement that clearly expresses what the student will be able to do after taking a course. A well-written learning objective statement provides a clear picture of the outcome or performance you expect as a result of the lesson. It should be specific, concise, and most importantly, observable or measurable. So how do you write a good learning objective? A learning objective consists of three parts. We have behavior verb, condition, and criteria. Let's start with behavior verb. We all learned in elementary school that a verb is an action word. In a learning objective, the verb is also an action word, but it's also a special kind of action verb. The verb in a learning objective is an action word that implies an observable behavior. For example, although we as teachers all want our students to appreciate one thing or another, it is impossible to see when a student appreciates something. Understand is another noble word that implies something we want our students to do, but we cannot see. Understanding. The best we can do is make inferences that a student appreciates or understands something based on what the student does or says in a control situation. What then are behavioral verbs? The answer is quite simple. A behavioral verb is a word that denotes an observable action or the creation of an observable product. Verbs such as identify, name, and describe are behavioral because you can observe the act or product of identifying, naming, or describing. Some verbs are embedded in a phrase that gives them a specific behavioral meaning. Examples are state a rule or apply a rule. In this case, the behavior is contextual, and the context is the rule in the question. There are many verbs that qualify as behavioral. Next, we have conditions. The conditions part of an objective specifies the circumstances, commands, materials, directions, etc. that the student is given to initiate the behavior. All behavior relevant to intended student learning outcomes can be best understood within a context of the conditions under which the behavior is to be performed or demonstrated. The conditions part of an objective usually begins with a simple declarative statement, such as the following. Upon the request, the student will. This means the student is given an oral or written request to do something. Given some physical object, the student will. This means the student is actually given something such as a map, a number or multiplication problem, a passage, etc. This relates to performing the intended behavior. Notice that the examples above, there's no mention of the description of the instruction that precedes the initiation of the behavior. The instruction that leads to the behavior should never be included in the actual instruction or objective. Instruction that leads students to accomplishing an objective is a separate issue. Here we want to concentrate on describing only the condition under which the desired student behavior is to be performed. Criteria. The criteria part of a learning objective is a declarative statement that describes how well the behavior must be performed to satisfy the intention of the behavioral verb. Usually, criteria are expressed in some minimum number or as what we must be as a minimum included in a student response. For example, an objective might be the form, given a list of the first 100 numbers arranged in ascending order conditions. The student will identify the verb, at least 9 prime numbers, which is a criteria. Notice that the objective doesn't specify which 9 numbers and sets a floor of at least 9 as a minimum. Also, the method by which the student identifies the minimum 9 prime numbers is not specific. That is determined in the actual assessment. The student could circle the numbers, highlight them, or draw a line through them, etc. This also implies that the student will be correct if he identifies more than 9 correctly, but does not specify whether it is acceptable to identify 9 correctly and 1 or more incorrectly. Well-written objectives are the heart of any lesson plan. If the objectives you compose are fuzzy and difficult, if not impossible to assess, the rest of the lesson plan you create that is based on the objective is likely to be flawed. Before you begin to write an objective, spend a little time thinking about what you are describing, and remember to make the student behavior observable. You will find this process will actually help you to clarify what you intend, and you will be better able to communicate the intent to your students, regardless of their grade level, age, or subject. On the matter of being fuzzy, remember this. Fuzzy thinking might get you through the day, but it will never get you through a career. Anytime you write a learning objective, ask yourself the question, does this objective clearly communicate and describe the intended learning outcome? If you can find exceptions or loopholes as a way of meeting the objective, then the objective should be rewritten. Learning to write learning objectives that describe what you want takes patience and practice. Make sure you get as much feedback as possible about your efforts. Also note, avoid using words like understand, learn, and know. They are not measurable because there's no product involved. Sometimes a degree of accuracy is implied by words such as correctly and successfully. Not all lessons result in tangible product. Therefore, when students verbally demonstrate their learning, the measurable action involves telling, explaining, or discussing. Let's take a look at what we just learned and follow the steps to write a learning objective based on the 3 components we just went over. Step 1. What behavior will the student be able to do after taking this course? Participants will be able to define their health literacy proficiency. Step 2. Under what condition will the behavior be performed? Using the newest vital sign screening to. Step 3. Against what criteria? Evaluate if the project is still viable as measured against the performance goals. Step 4. Now let's put this all together. Participants will be able to define their health literacy proficiency using the newest vital sign screening to evaluate if their ability to process health information has improved after the plain language class at their community center. So let's look at SMART objectives. In this module, you learned about SMART goals. Remember, S starts for specific, M measurable, A attainable, R realistic, and T timely. Let's look at the steps for SMART objectives. Step 1, write a specific goal statement. Step 2, define how you'll measure your progress. Step 3, is your goal attainable? Step 4, is your goal relevant? Step 5, is your goal time-bound? Here's an example. At the end of the presentation, the community health worker will be able to identify the 5 steps for writing a SMART goal. So let's take a look at another model for developing learning objectives. We have the ABCD model. This model includes 4 distinct components. We have audience, behavior, condition, and degree. As a reminder, objectives must be both observable and measurable to be effective. We've talked about the use of words like understand and learn in writing objectives. These are generally not acceptable as they are difficult to measure. You have to keep in mind that written objectives are a vital part of instructional design because they provide the roadmap for designing and delivering curriculum. Let's break down the 4 parts of this model. First, we have audience. This part describes the intended learner or end user of the instruction. An example here will be the community health worker student. Behavior. It describes learner-centered learning. Must be observable and measurable. You will define the measurement somewhere else in the goal. So this could be, an example would be, should be able to describe the steps of ABCD model. Next, we have condition. Equipment or tools that may or may not be utilized in the completion of the behavior. Environmental conditions may also be included. An example here will be after lecture the steps of this model. Last, we have degree. This states the standard for acceptable performance, the time, accuracy, proportion, quality. An example from the example I just presented would be with 3 practice sessions of writing learning objectives. So let me sum that up. The objective here will be the community health worker student should be able to describe the steps of the ABCD model after lecture of the steps of this model with 3 practice sessions of writing learning objectives. Below on the screen, you will also see another example for writing in this model. The community health worker student would demonstrate with significant accuracy the ability to interpret blood glucose readings. Developing your learning objectives will help you create your lesson plan. What is a lesson plan, you might be asking? A lesson plan is the instructor's roadmap of what students need to learn and how it will be done effectively during the class time. Before you plan your lesson, you will first need to identify the learning objectives for this class or presentation. Then, you can design appropriate learning activities and develop strategies to obtain feedback on student learning. A successful lesson plan addresses and integrates these 3 key components. First, you have objectives for student learning. Second, teaching learning activities. And last, strategies to check student understanding. Specifying concrete objectives for student learning will help you determine the kinds of teaching and learning activities you will use in class. These activities will define how you would check whether the learning objectives have been accomplished. So let's take a look at the components of a lesson plan. Learning objectives. A clearly defined learning goal will anchor your lesson plan. If a learning goal is missing, you have missed the mark. Materials and resources. Make sure you have what you need to teach. If your lesson plan is perfect, then you are missing a material. Nothing can be more frustrating than that. If you're using technology, remember to always test your materials. Activities. It's important to keep in mind that we learn by doing. After 2 weeks, we remember 10% of what we read, 20% of what we hear, 30% of what we see, 50% of what we see and hear, 70% of what we say, and 90% of what we do. Assessment. Assessment can be formal and informal in nature. Tests, quizzes, worksheets, or projects graded by instructor are formal assessments. Thumbs up, thumbs down, writing answers on a whiteboard. Anecdotal assessment takes place during guided instruction, one-on-one instruction, or small group instruction. Last, we have wrap-up and reflection. This is time that you should allow for summary and discussion. Formal and informal assessment are fine too here. So a component of a lesson plan included assessments. Let's take a look at the 2 types of assessments. First, we have formative. Formative assessments. Formative assessment information must be fed forward into an instructional model that allows for responsiveness to students' needs. Formative assessments check progress along the way. The information gained guides the next steps in instruction and helps teachers and students consider the additional learning opportunities needed to ensure success. Examples of these assessments include projects and performances, writing assignments, tests and quizzes, and asking questions. The second type of assessment we have are summative assessments. So the goal is to evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing it against some sort of standard or benchmark. So it serves as sort of an end survey. Summative assessments provide teachers and students more information about the attainment of knowledge. An example of this will be a senior recital, a final project, a midterm paper, or midterm exam. So what do we do with all this? Our goal is to help our students improve. During the wrap-up section of your lesson plan, an evaluation is usually provided. or given to the participants who have attended the lecture or the presentation. It is important to remember constructive feedback in regards when receiving and also giving feedback. It is important to state the constructive purpose of your feedback. Describe specifically what you have observed. Describe your reactions and your observations of the effect of others. Give the other person an opportunity to respond. Offer a very clear and specific suggestion. Express your support, summarize clearly, and follow up. Make sure your feedback is specific to related behavior. It is also important to remember that constructive feedback requires action that the presenter can change or improve. In this video, we reviewed learning objectives, lesson planning, assessments, and constructive feedback. Take everything you learned today and place it in your teaching skills toolbox. By the end of this training module, the community health worker will be able to develop lesson plans based on the demographics of the target community, demonstrate delivery of individual and group lesson plans, identify methods, tools, and techniques for assessing concept comprehension and mastery. As governed by the state of Texas, the learner-centered competencies we will address in this module are ability to share information one-on-one, ability to master information, plan and lead classes, and collect and use information from community people.